Welcome to Blended Learning, Embracing a Partnership Model. There's a bit.ly on the bottom of the first couple of screens so that if you want to jump in and look at the presentation, you can do so. It's bit.ly, bit.ly/BCS-BLPP, Blended Learning Partnership. Okay. My name is Jennifer Hand. I am one of the blended learning coaches for Inca High School, North Buncombe High School, and Irwin High School.
And I'm Kendra Cameron Jarvis. I am the blended learning coach for Kountze Intermediate, Valley Springs, Inca Intermediate, and Inca Middle.
And I'm Wendy Fusco. I'm the blended learning coach for the elementary schools in the North Buncombe district. So that's Barnardsville, North Buncombe Elementary, Weaverville Primary, and Weaverville Elementary.
And we are recording this session so that you can reference it later. We have a little definition there of what a blended learning coach is, if you are not familiar with what a blended learning coach is, but we promote the integration of curriculum and digital learning best practices in your classroom through collaboration, co-teaching, reflection, and professional development. So you should have a blended learning coach that you can contact for support. And jump in anytime if you have any questions, just let us know. Okay, our learning targets for today are at the end of this session, participants will be able to identify partnership principles of strength and areas of improvement and develop a deeper understanding of blended learning components and how they impact student agency. And we'll explain that more as we go along.
So we want to start out with assumptions that you might have had when you first started teaching, because hopefully by the end of this training, you will have some different ideas and different viewpoints. So if you're able, this is a Jamboard, and you'll click on the little emoji to open up the Jamboard. If somebody wants to click on that and open it, or can I? No, I can't. I think if you click on the emoji. Yeah, see,
There we go.
There you go.
Got it.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
So on this Jamboard, it's split in half. And what I would like for you to reflect on is when you first started teaching, what are some assumptions that you had about teaching? We all came into the teaching profession with ideas of what it was going to be like and how we were going to be as a teacher. And so if you would, along the left-hand side of the Jamboard, you've got your tools. And one of the tools is a Post-it note that you can drag over, and you can add your assumptions. So if you're able, grab a Post-it note, drag it over, and add at least a couple assumptions that you had about teaching. And then on the other side, if you'll add Post-it notes there and think about where those assumptions originated from. Where did they come from? Jennifer, I'm not seeing the presentation. Ah, there you go. Okay. So let's pause just for a minute to allow for some reflection time. So I'm going to go ahead and share some of those common assumptions that we probably all had, or at least a few of us had. One of them that we can probably all agree is that students will sit in rows and students will quietly work on their assignments, which if you've been in teaching even for a week, you know that that is not true. And if you're a fellow middle school teacher like me, you know that is not true. And you know, I probably had that assumption too coming into the teaching profession. And I don't know if it came from movies or TV shows, or maybe even, you know, when I was in school, because I can remember having some really strict teachers where we were afraid to make a peep. So we did sit in rows. I can't tell you what I learned in that classroom though. So that was definitely an assumption that I had. And if you're like me, you probably heard this, you know, you can't smile until December because students will take advantage of you, right? So that's probably another assumption that we had as well. So as teachers, we don't have a lot of reflection time. So we wanted to give you some time just to reflect on what those assumptions were that you had coming into the profession. And as we go through this training today, just keep those in the forefront of your mind, because we're hoping at the end of this training, you're going to have some different ideas. So we're going to pop back into the presentation.
So as we look about the older way of thinking about the classroom, the way it was set up when I was in school, when my parents were in school, it was very hierarchical. The teacher was in charge. The students listened to the teacher. Students didn't really have any say or choice. They showed up, they did what the teacher said. That was the end of it. But now with a partnership model, we start to see more autonomy. The fact that we're giving some of that control over to the students so that they start to take ownership of their learning. And so looking at the hierarchical versus the autonomy, seeing that a hierarchical structure really does create a dependence. The students are completely dependent upon the teacher who's in charge to tell them what they're doing day to day, minute by minute, hour by hour. And so what we're finding is it creates tension. And that tension is leading to classroom management issues. Over and over, we hear more and more teachers talk about classroom management has changed and how hard it has become. It denies students that agency and that autonomy. They sit and get in a lot of ways. And again, that dependency of always looking to the teacher, but that dependency goes deeper than just what are we doing now, but the motivation to doing it. If there's not a grade, students don't do the work because they're like, why? They're not going to grade it. Why should I worry about it? They don't fully grasp that it's really about their learning. That's why the teacher's giving it to them to start with, is for the learning process. So autonomy starts to really give them that sense of, oh, I'm taking an active role in my learning. And as I have greater academic achievement and success, then that internal intrinsic value starts to go up. So what we see with autonomy is that it does produce greater academic success for students, but it's internalized. They have the intrinsic motivation to learn. They want to learn because they have some autonomy and control. It creates that independent learning and self-motivation so that they have a personal drive to keep learning. They show up because they want to know more, and it drives a hunger. The next slide goes into a little bit more of this dependence and independence, the fact that as students are dependent upon the teacher, that's where we get that tension and the power struggles and the classroom management issues, because the kids are just reacting. to the sense of, I don't want to sit and do this right now. I want to do something else. Or they shut down because it's not matching with their learning styles. Maybe they are a hands-on learner. If the activity is listen to a video and take notes and write a response, they're not as engaged. And that decreases their motivation. Again, relying on the teacher for direction, their goals, and ultimately creates an attitude of I don't care from the students. As they are given more independence, they have more agency and self-advocacy. All of a sudden, they start to realize the value in what they're learning, why they're learning it, and why they should care about learning. They start to self-reflect, not only on their academic growth, but also their personal growth of who they're becoming as a person. There's more intrinsic motivation. They start to set goals, and goal setting becomes a lifelong skill that goes beyond the classroom. We see improved learning outcomes because the students do have that ownership and they have a sense of success, which is really the whole point of what we want them to be as lifelong learners, is to hold that success and move forward with their own learning rather than a dependency that sometimes results in, I hate school.
Sorry, let me unmute. The next couple of slides are some information from the Panorama survey that we did with our students. So this is data that is from our schools, from our students. And if you can look at it, we looked at the teacher-student relationship and some of that data. The 3 through 5, how respectful is your teacher towards you, responded favorably at 89%. And at the 6 through 12, how many of your teachers are respectful towards you was also 89%. So you can see that our students do feel like teachers are respectful towards them. So that's a very positive information and data. You can see the number of students that responded. The next slide . The next slide is if you walked into class and you were upset, how concerned would your teacher be? So how do they feel that teachers are going to respond if they're upset? And elementary, 3 through 5, was 75% responded favorably. And you can see the breakdown of it and the number of students that felt that it would be quite concerned or extremely concerned. You can see those numbers and the percentages. At the high school level, that was a bit different. At 58% responded favorably. So if you look at that and the number of students, 579 thought none of their teachers would respond or care, and a few, and about half. 579 students is a lot of students. 1,687 is a lot of students. Even one we don't want. So if we look at these numbers, this is how students view how teachers would feel about if they were upset and walked into a classroom, would they really be concerned? So this speaks to relationships, which we're going to talk more about in a minute. And this last one, when your teacher asks, how are you? How often do you feel that your teacher really wants to know the answer? This is interesting. At the 3 to 5, 76% responded favorably, but you can even see that the numbers of students who felt sometimes or almost never is almost 1,000 students that feel like their teacher would not care. But there are about 3,000 that did feel like that their teacher would really meant it, really wanted to know how they were. At the high school, it's a bit different. 61% responded favorably, that they felt like their teacher really did want to know how they were. I mean, I know sometimes at the door, you're like, oh, how are you? Do you really mean it? Do you really want to know? And so we need to think about that as we're building relationships with our students. This is one line, okay. Some of the benefits to becoming partners with students, and this is again about relationships and having a two-way relationship with students, is that students can take an active role in goal setting for themselves, and that can be learning goals for short-term and long-term goals. Identify student needs and interests. So if you have a partnership with students, you can start to identify what are their needs and what are their interests. Students have increased personal reflection, so that allows them to take ownership of what they're doing and to reflect on what is happening in their life and in their environment and in the classroom and for their future. They also are able to advocate for themselves as learners because they have an understanding of what the learning is and what it is that the expectations are and the goals are for not only just a project, but overall for their education. And they also, there's improved student and teacher relationships. So you'll see that, which also leads to classroom management again, which we're hearing a lot about. I think those relationships can really impact what that looks like in the classroom.
So there are lots of different blended learning models, and we've talked about these in our previous trainings. These are just a few of them. So just very quickly, whole group rotation is where students rotate through stations.
If we have any tutoring.
All right, sorry about that. So that's whole group rotation, where your whole class is transitioning through offline and online stations at the same time. The other type of station rotation is the same thing, but you have groups of students that are put together intentionally. You've grouped these students intentionally that are rotating through stations, online and offline activities. One of those stations is teacher-led. And talking about partnership, this teacher-led station is a time that the teacher can really focus on the needs of that small group. So if you teach a math class and you've grouped students by skills, right? Then when you get those groups of students to you in a teacher station, you can really focus on the skills that group is lacking, right? Station rotation also has a station that is collaborative, where students can collaborate offline together. Another model is the flipped classroom. So this is where you give students the content prior to them coming into the classroom. Traditionally, this is done through video, but it can also be done through text. So students watch or they read about the content that traditionally you would teach. Then they come into the classroom, and classroom time is spent to really go deeper into that content and apply their learning. And it's time for the teacher to spend one-on-one time with students, really helping them on their individual needs, or the teacher can spend time with groups of students. She or he can group students together and work on what they need as a group. So that individual coaching, building those relationships is really important there as well. And then you have the playlist, which is a list of activities related to a learning target or a standard. Again, it balances between online activities and offline activities with teacher check-ins along the way. Again, building those relationships where the teacher can talk to the individual students and see how they're doing. These models build that independence, give students choices, and build student agency in the classroom. So how do blended learning models support partnerships? Some of the things we just mentioned. It gives students more control over their learning because they have choices. We all like to have choices, including your students. It makes them more invested in their learning. It allows you to coach students, provide that personalized instruction that we talked about in the small groups during like station rotation, or the coaching that we talked about during the flipped learning model or the playlist. It increases student agency by giving them choice and making them feel like they have some ownership. It creates that student-centered learning environment in the classroom, and it builds that positive partnership and relationship between teacher and student, and that transforms the learning in and outside of the classroom.
Let me unmute. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the different aspects of the partnership principles for teachers and students. One of the first things is that it's built on mutual respect and trust. So learning is grounded in relationships, and students want to learn from somebody that they like. They want to be in a positive environment. And so forming those relationships is fundamental to a person-student-centered approach to learning. So what does mutual respect and trust look like in the classroom, maybe in your classroom? If you want to drop something in the chat, or if you can't get to the chat and you want to unmute, we would love to hear from you. You know, what does that trust and respect look like in the classroom? If you want to jump in, you can.
So may I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Anybody can jump in. We're open here.
So one of the things that I've seen in classrooms is the teacher and the students collaboratively work on a classroom contract. So instead of saying rules, which are punitive and sometimes have a negative connotation, they all come together and talk about what a respectful classroom looks like from the student perspective and the teacher perspective. And they come up with like a list of statements of, this is what we do in our classroom. And they write it on a big piece of paper and they all sign their name to it and they stick it up on the wall. And if you're a secondary teacher, you know, you may have like 4 of those, right? Because you've got different kids and different ideas in each classroom. But I love that idea because it's not just the teacher, that top down that we were talking about earlier, saying this is what we do in the classroom. It's saying, hey, this is our classroom. What do we want it to look like? So, and I think for me, that is mutual respect and trust.
I agree. And I've seen that be very positive in the classroom because then it's not being forced on them. There's buy-in by everyone. And even if they don't love all the procedures or the things that they've agreed on, they know that they've done it as a community. So I think that's really important as part of that mutual respect and trust. Oh, sorry. Okay, the next is shared purpose and goals. So students need to understand why they're doing the work that they're doing. What is the purpose of the work? Once they understand the purpose of the work, that increases student engagement because they have ownership of that work. They understand the why. I have heard many times when I was teaching in the classroom, students say, well, why do I need to know that? And you need to be able to tell them, and they need to be able to understand that in order to buy in and to see it as something that they need to do, and not just for the grade, but for the intrinsic purpose of what they're doing. So it can actively engage them in setting learning goals so that they have goals for their learning, not just goals to get things done, but about learning targets. Why are they learning? What is the long-term effect of what they're going to be doing? How is it going to impact their life and their future? I think it's very important. So we need to think about what happens when students set their own learning goals. Okay, the next thing is it's grounded in reciprocity. So that means that the teachers and the students have to be willing to share. They have to be willing to give and take. And so you have to, give feedback, give respect, have your be engaged. And so teachers need to be engaged with students and on a more personal level. One-on-one, you need to know your students. You need to be engaged with them. You need to give and you need to take. And you know what? Part of the taking means that, hey, I might ask a student, how do you feel about what we're doing? And they might not like it. And we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay to say, maybe I can change as well. So I think you have to have that reciprocity so that you both benefit and grow in the learning environment. So what does that look like in your classroom? So you want to think about that. What does that look like? Is that something you want to work on?
And when you're having that communication, you're having that open, it has to be honest and it has to be open, not just from the teacher's perspective, it's a two-way. So when a student does speak up and say, I'm not getting it, the way this is being taught is not clicking, the teacher has to hear that. But I think at times it has to be the other way around. The teacher has to be able to say, I'm trying to communicate this and it's important, and here's why it's important. So being able to have that two-way listening is just as important as talking. Sometimes it's even more so, because sometimes student may just be having a bad day and you need to let them have that vent, get it out, get it over, and then they can move on. They can process through that. And so do you design time in your lessons to allow those conversations with your students, for them to be able to share, to talk, to have a voice, that you have the time to listen and really take in not only a nonverbal feedback, but the verbal as well?
I think that also goes back to the mutual respect and trust, because if you're in a safe environment, you can have those honest conversations and nobody feels upset about it because you're in a trusting relationship.
You're absolutely right. They go hand in hand, because if the trust isn't there, then no one's going to speak up honestly and be open. And if anyone is cut down, stopped in their thoughts or then you lose that respect. So they really do go hand in hand.
This is a good place to use technology there. Many teachers do check-ins, right? The SEL activities, or even a Google form quiz, and you could do one question, the very last question, and that question's not graded. Maybe you could say, maybe you're finishing a unit or whatever, and you could say, what could I have done differently in this unit to help you better understand or be more engaged, right?
Absolutely.
You could even do that anonymously, and not collect email addresses, so that it's just anonymous and people are more likely, to be honest in their communication.
Absolutely. And the other is regular feedback, not to do it just once or twice here or there, not to do it just as grades are starting to come due or right before a parent-teacher conference. But the idea that there's feedback opportunities for both the teacher to provide that feedback to students, but also for students to give that feedback back to the teacher. And I love, Kendra, your idea of on the form being able to say, what could I have done differently as a teacher? Because I think about my own teaching style. I teach based on my own learning style. And I don't always think about the students who, if I had to write a song and put my poetry to music, I would be totally paranoid. But there are other kids that, creating their own jam to reflect that poetry would engage them on such a deeper level than me, who's like, can I just write this on a piece of paper because it's hard enough to put a poem together and rhyme words. But being able to offer choice, and I don't think we always think about that. And so giving that feedback, but then acting on it. It's one thing to ask a student to give feedback, but if we never do anything with it, then they're going to very quickly figure out, why am I even telling you this?
I think it's important. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I think on the
Go for it.
feedback piece, I think it's important that we give feedback many times, and that's the end of it. Feedback comes at the end of a project or at the end of a paper when it's turned in. But if we don't have that cycle of being able to revise on top of it, so I give you feedback, and then students should be able to fix it or change it or improve what they're doing based on that feedback. And whether it's positive or negative, it can inspire them to change what they're doing. And I think we have to be open to allowing for that change.
And the same with teachers, asking for feedback, not just at the end of the unit, like I was talking about earlier, but throughout the teaching cycle, so that, you can shift this year and not have to wait until next year to incorporate the feedback that you got this year.
Yeah,
Yes.
Students are watching us as teachers, and I learned that early on, that they're paying attention to what you're doing. And so you can get a lot of valuable feedback from the students if you're open to it.
Mhm. Very much.
So continuing with the partnership principles and relationship and giving students choice, the next one is balance of power, to ensure each partner has an equal voice and choice. And in the classroom, we are partners. We should be partners with our students. So blended learning models, they shift the structure to give students more control over the time, place, pace, and path of their learning. So as you think about your classroom and the type of assignments that you give students, do your students have a voice and choice in their learning? Do you give them an activity and say, okay, you can read this, or you can watch this, or you can read this text on a piece of paper, or you can read it online? I mean, something as simple as that. We all have different learning styles. I'm much more of a visual learner. If I have to listen to something, sometimes it's hard for me to focus. So if I see something on the screen and I can watch it and read it at the same time, that works better for me. And so give your students that opportunity. There are so many templates out there that are available for you to use to create choice boards, or this or that, or HyperDocs that do have some choices in them. The next partnership principle is committed to learning together. So both people in a partnership, they must be committed to learning together. So commit to growing our practice while students grow theirs. What are you learning about your students during a lesson, and how are you growing? How are they growing? How are you growing? Because we are lifelong learners, both the students and ourselves, we should always be growing in our practice, whether that's a student or an educator. So this is a Jamboard. It's just an opportunity for you to do some reflection, which we don't have time to do that very often. It's called a this or that, and I've linked it. So I think if you click on the image perhaps, or the title, sorry, I did that a while ago. The way this works is it's a choice. It's split in half. And so you've got those handy Post-it notes on the left-hand side of your screen. And these are revisiting those partnership principles. So as you look at these two, shared purpose and goal setting, and you look at the other one, built on mutual respect and trust, which one of these do you feel is your strength out of these two? That's where I want you to put your sticky. So figure out which one you feel strongest in and pull your sticky over there and write your name on it. Perfect. All right, let's look at the next one. So we're going to click on the arrow at the top. All right, so here, grounded in reciprocity. All right, we talked about that one. And we also talked about prioritize honest and open communication. So looking at these two, which is your teaching strength? Again, grab one of those stickies and put your name on it and drag it to the one, the partnership principle that you feel is your strength. Perfect. All right, let's flip to the next one. All right, so we have rely on regular feedback, and then we have balance power to ensure each partner has equal voice and choice. So looking at these two partnership principles, which one is your strength? Perfect. All right, let's flip to the next one. All right, so the two together this time, on the left, we have committed to learning together. And then on the right, we have shared purpose and goal setting. So out of these two, which is your strength, go ahead and grab that sticky note and type your name and move it to the partnership principle that you feel you are strongest at. You got to choose. Perfect. All right, let's flip to the next one. All right, so now thinking about all of them, which one do you feel like you need to invest time in developing? That's what I want you to do here. I want you to grab a sticky and I want you to write down the one partnership principle that you feel like you need to grow in, and you're going to move it to the what point. So go ahead and type the partnership principle that you feel you need to invest time in developing this year. Yeah, feedback is probably mine too. I don't give it as quickly as I should. And I think a lot of teachers struggle with that. So let's move that over to the what point. Perfect. And then grab a sticky. Okay. And I want you to think about how are you going to develop that in your classroom this year? What is at least one step that you can take to move forward in that area? And that's what I would like for you to type on this sticky note. Perfect. So once you have that, you're going to move that to the how point. Okay. And then go ahead and grab a sticky. And I want you to think about, why is this important in your classroom? Why is it important for you? And why is it important for your students? What is your why for this? All right, you're gonna grab that and move it to the why point. And the very last thing is the when. So grab a sticky, and so you've identified the area you're going to work on and how you're going to work on it and why it's important. Okay, when are you going to work on it? When is that going to happen in your classroom? Let's make a plan. And I would say start small. Make sure that this is achievable for yourself. Perfect. So make sure that you move that to win. So allowing yourself to reflect on your strengths in the teaching and the partnership principles, how to start with their strengths, and you're ending with an area of growth. And now you have a plan to improve this in your classroom. So we can pop back into the presentation.
All right. So this TED Talk, Rita Pearson really just does a great job in a very short amount of time talking about the importance of partnerships. So we're going to just listen to her presentation real quick and pay particular attention to where she's really referencing those key components towards partnership and partnering and advocating for students.
I think we need to click that little button when we share.
You might need to share the sound.
Yeah.
Which is well hidden somewhere.
I think you need to stop sharing real quick. And then when you hit share again, underneath that image of what you want to share, you'll see a tiny little button that you have to check.
Negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
She says it the best. And that relationship leads to a partnership. You can't have one without the other. Because in that partnering with students, you're saying we are in this together. We are growing and learning together. I'm going to take you by the hand and lead you, but in leading, I'm leading you to be a lifelong learner. And we already know that teachers serve a very powerful role. And teachers can make or break some students, because I dare say that if we all were asked, we could name a teacher that had a very positive influence on our lives. But on equal note, we can name that teacher that had some of the most negative impacts on our life. We might not remember what that teacher taught us, but we'll remember how that teacher made us feel. And so that's part of what makes partnering with our students so invaluable.
Okay, so in wrapping up, there are a couple of things here on our slides for you. There's a link to the Frontline My Learning Plan link so that you can get credit. If first you don't, if you can't get to it, we can make sure that you get it. Also, you can contact your blended learning coach. If you click the link here, that's the blended learning coach link, it'll show you who all our coaches are, what schools they serve, so that if you're not sure who your coach is, you can click on that and you can find out who your coach is for your school and get in touch with them. Invite them into your classroom to see what you're doing, to support you as you move towards a stronger partnership with your students. They can help you and just talk it through with you. Also, if you want to learn more, there's YouTube here that you can watch. Do you want to talk about that, Kendra, at all?
So that YouTube video it's about 2 minutes long, and it just goes a little bit deeper into the partnership principles that we discussed today.
And then I added this book. It's called Balance with Blended Learning. And you can see there's an image of it here on the slide, and Wendy is holding it up. But this is a really great book for you to use to get started. It goes through a lot more than what we talked about, but it can take your classroom to a blended learning environment, and you'll see the benefits with your students. So thank you for attending. Any questions, comments, anything?